Hi everybody and welcome to our third session of Conversation Aviation in this Road to Recovery phase of discussions that we're having. And it was interesting, we were talking as we were preparing for this, and I was flying back from Manchester back to Cologne yesterday, and it really felt like this recovery was happening. The airport was full and there were lots of movements around. So it's such an important thing to be thinking about is how we're going to handle the way the industry expands over the next sort of 2-3 months, Easter and into the summer, and hopefully this recovery really is happening now. And in this particular discussion, we're really focusing on what we call the caring for our people element. And I know, for the most part, when we start talking about caring for our people and well-being, I know a lot of people start thinking about the concept of yoga and kind of all of that kind of what people might term fluffy stuff. But in reality, it's ultimately about trust and how people feel in an organisation. And we already have, at the heart of the aviation kind of system, is within Regulation 376 on occurrence reporting, is the just culture. And I think, I don't know what you think, Chris, but for me that's really at the heart of this, this concept of caring for our people.
Yeah, hello John, hello Claudio, nice to be here again, talking about the topic. Yeah, we had that sort of preamble, and on one hand there's the hard law, literally, that needs us to have good reporting systems and open communication and ultimately trust in our organisations. And then there's the reality of the sort of softer human side, which is, people want to talk about how they are personally and what affects them in terms of their attitude and their behaviours and how they behave at work, which sometimes is hidden from most of us. Some people behave in ways that we're not sure why they're behaving that way because of those kind of personal issues. And then there's the more official reporting systems that all the management systems are requiring us to have, and how well they work and how they blend into each other. How do we feel at work to be able to speak openly at the right levels to make everyone aware of how we're feeling today and how we're operating, and ultimately how that affects our performance at work in interfacing with our safety systems and obviously the aircraft in the air and how they're safe. So I think it can be a tricky one, but we've got, as I say, the frameworks for creating this trust that we need, and then actually how it's done in practice, which is a vital bit currently, as we know.
And from your side, Claudia, I think certainly what we see is that there's lots of effort from organisations managing safety risks, and actually the idea of integrating well-being and managing psychological stresses within the management system is kind of an interesting step forward, I think, in linking that trust element and actually thinking more about the human performance or the things that impact human performance in that way. I don't know, what do you think?
I think it's a really interesting topic, and it's one that's people have got lots of different opinions about, mainly because of previous experiences. And when we're talking about trust, a lot of it's based upon previous experiences. If we're going back 5-10 years in the industry, we've all been on the shop floor, we've all worked in aviation, we've all physically had our hands on the aircraft. We've been in environments where there hasn't been trust within the management system, there hasn't been changes. But a lot of that has been changed over the last couple of years, especially because of the pandemic, especially because of changes in personnel within the industry. Things are coming to a better level where people are feeling more open to actually discuss it, and this is why it's more important now to actually push the envelope. It's like, well, now that there is an opportunity, now that there's hard laws, to actually have just cultures within organisations and that people are more aware of what they mean, this is a great opportunity for organisations and individuals to actually push that forward and to have that open access system. Especially from an organisational point of view, they've got to understand that the more they're aware of issues, the more they can fix them. The more that they allow people to actually tell what the issues are and create solutions around it, the more performance they're going to get out of the individuals. And from an individual's point of view, you're never going to actually have an organisational trust and have an organisational culture that works unless you actually push forward and have the bravery to actually say when things are wrong and actually say when there are issues. even if it doesn't work initially, you've got to have that bravery just to push it forward and keep saying it over and over again and making sure that the organisation listens. Otherwise, everybody's performances will be diminished. And that effectively relates back to well-being. It relates to motivation, well-being. Like you said, it's not just yogurt and yogurt. It's how you physically and psychologically and emotionally affected by what's going on in your environment at work and at home that affects your performance and safety.
It's interesting you say that, actually, because Chris, when we've talked a lot, I remember in the past, about how an organisation understands safety, is this concept of improving safety by understanding the human in the system. I know that sounds really fancy, but yeah, I think ultimately it's about that, isn't it? It's not just trying to fix the operational technical sides of the problem, but understanding, you know, the role of the individual within the system and the organisation, and kind of, you know, looking at, I hear people talk about this idea of looking at things through a well-being lens, and how that, you know, how things impact people and what they do. How do you see that?
Yeah, and going back to a couple of references there to just culture, just going back a step, is, you know, we use a lot of terminology, and we've been discussing, you know, words are worlds, and how people understand what we mean when we say just culture or well-being. But ultimately, you know, James Reason would say it's an atmosphere of trust that we're trying to create and preserve, and that includes humans and systems. Because ultimately, when, you know, unfortunately, when things do go wrong sometimes, and we do investigations into what happened, most of the time there's that human element, and things are surprising to us that have happened, even though at the time, in retrospect, you know, looking at why the person did what they did at the time, we kind of don't really get to the bottom of that in real time. And I think for me, going back to just culture, and we had a debate recently about this, a lot of people understand just culture as retroactive, i.e. when things have gone wrong, we look to do the right thing and do things fairly based on what people did at the time. But for me, just culture needs to run through an organisation continually, day to day, and forming that trust and that open relationship with, you know, different levels of the organisation, and leaders really wanting people to just talk openly about what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it the way they're doing it in real time. So I think there is that kind of understanding of when we say, you know, EU 376, and we've got just culture requirements in organisational management systems. It's what does that mean in real terms? Not only when things go wrong, we're looking backwards in time, why things went wrong, but in real time, day-to-day interactions, and that sort of trust, atmosphere of trust that James Reason talks about, which is an old concept, but I think it still rings true today when we're talking to airlines that we've been doing over the last few months. There are some really good examples of how the management teams under specific leadership kind of styles have really nailed this, and they're looking at all the angles, and they're doing it in conjunction with departments like human resources or human capital, and they've really got a handshake across the whole piece, and they're doing a great job. It can be tricky given the context of, you know, what's been happening over the last few months, but I think it's one that could be done really well. And as you say, John, it's not just yogurt and yoga, even though I like both. You wouldn't think it like me. But, it's one that can work very powerfully if it's done right.
I really like the way that you put it, that it's not retroactive, and I think this is a concept that people forget, is that just culture is not a reactive thing. It's a proactive
it's living and breathing, isn't it?
It's living and breathing. It has to be part of the environment and every element of safety and every element of well-being, everything that you're actually doing. It's got to be proactive, it's got to be continuous. And if it's not going to work. And I think that's what's forgotten, and you're completely right, Chris. In a lot of organisations, especially ones that we've done work with and even worked with in the past, it's always looking at it after the fact. Whereas it should be actually constantly looking at, okay, what's going to come up in the future? How are you feeling today? How are you actually feeling it? How is it going to affect your performance? If we can be more proactive in the industry, we can actually mitigate a lot of risk.
And it's interesting, I know even in our own thoughts now, we have a group of people we're working with particularly in the context of well-being, to really try and provide the answers that I know a lot of people have questions to. And I know I see a lot of people, there's a lot of willing interest to think about how you embed well-being within a management system. But then there's a lot of new stuff there that might not come so easily. So I think particularly from our side, the more we can use, our different ways of, safety promotion to provide the guidance of what that looks like and help people in organisations, hopefully that will be a...
Yeah, and I think that's going back to the words we use and what they mean to people individually, their initial kind of reaction to various words. I think we need to converge on how well-being fits into just culture or vice versa, whichever way around it is. Because I know that in some instances when well-being is talked about in management teams, it's kind of looked down on because it's a bit maybe soft, a bit woolly, a bit yoghurt-y. But we need to really start to fuse the two together. Just culture is a very well-established term in the industry, and I use the term deliberately as opposed to the practice is sometimes variable. But joining the two together in this atmosphere of trust is something that I think we need to converge on over the next months and years.
Well, they're completely linked, aren't they? Although they're used separately, they are completely linked. And like you said, it's about using words, and it's putting it as a law, for example, or make it as a regulation isn't going to help because it just becomes a tick box exercise. But having it as guidance, safety promotion, awareness, as long as and we all do our job by actually helping people be more aware, having guidance on how it can be implemented with it, hopefully that could be part of the next stage of actually integrating it all together.
And it's that kind of creating that movement for culture change, and actually that sets up quite nicely, maybe just to mention one of the big kind of next steps in our well-being journey in the context of Together for Safety is that from the 7th to the 11th of March we're going to be having a Wellbeing Awareness Week. And actually it's almost like an oxymoron, because one of the big things we're saying is well-being isn't just something you do a week of, it's something that's embedded in your organisation. So it's kind of strange to say, well, we're going to have an awareness week, but that's one of the key things, is really explaining a bit more about what well-being is, a bit more about how it, what are the benefits for organisations, how does that fit to operational leaders and operational teams and the frontline staff. And one thing we haven't necessarily touched on so much so far is then, like we already have in the Wellbeing Resource Hub, is materials. So as an individual, people know where information's available to practice self-care, if that makes sense. And I think, it's something, I don't know about the two of you, I've been much more aware about my personal well-being and the need to take responsibility for myself more, perhaps.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. And since we've started this whole journey, we've been doing this for over a year now, that whole concept of put on your own oxygen mask before helping others is something I keep going back to, because it's so true. If you're not in a position where you can help yourself, you're not in a position where you can help others. And I think people just generally forget that. I've even heard people in organisations and management saying, we have to do different things, we have to make sure that they're taken care of. It's like, well, if we don't take care of ourselves first, then we're not in a position to take care of all the people. If we're making decisions on behalf of others, it's our duty to make sure that we are physically, emotionally and psychologically fit for duty before we can actually take a step forward.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I like that analogy, the oxygen mask one. One of the things I'm quite keen on doing when I'm talking to people that I work with, whether, whatever level, is I'm quite open about, the fact I need to go out for my mountain bike ride, 3 times a week, and I make space for that, and I include that in my day as much as possible. So I think that's a great point, Robin.
And that's, we're coming up to the end of our 15 minutes, so we can get this in the right space to get it on LinkedIn. So I think that was a great kind of conclusion to the discussion there. And thanks very much, guys. It was great to catch up and talk about this really important topic again. And maybe just a quick second advert at the end is to remind everybody we're going to have the Runway to Recovery live session at 1400 CET next Friday. So that's, I have to check the date now, is that the 25th? Yeah, Friday the 25th of February, 1400 CET. We'll post the Zoom link so people can join us. Unfortunately Chris can't join us, but Claudio and I and some others, and we've got some special guests from airlines, airports and things to join us in the discussion about the recovery. So thanks very much, take care, bye.
All the best.
Cheers, bye.